When you think about public health today, or disease control in general, there is this expectation of just absolute sterility.
Right, a complete architecture of separation.
Exactly. I mean, you picture gleaming white laboratories,
Yeah.
airtight biosafety level 4 facilities.
BSL-4 labs, yeah.
Yeah. Scientists encapsulated in those pressurized suits that look like they, belong out of spacewalk. It feels contained.
We find a lot of comfort in that, knowing there are impenetrable physical barriers like negative air pressure or titanium airlocks.
Multi-stage decontamination showers.
Exactly. All of that standing between the researchers and the lethal pathogens they study.
But then, you step back a few decades. You step into the jungle of South America in the early 1960s, and suddenly that pristine architecture just vanishes.
It completely disappears.
It really does. You aren't looking at pressurized suits. You're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely raw, incredibly primitive, and honestly, terrifyingly unprotected.
Unprotected is the word.
And that is exactly where we are taking you today. Welcome to this deep dive into the source material. We are looking at a truly harrowing chapter from the mid-20th century.
And we are pulling from a very unique stack of sources for this deep dive.
Yeah, let's talk about those sources.
Well, we have a specialized dossier. It blends the public, peer-reviewed records, things like CDC documents, tropical medicine papers, obituaries from the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene.
The official clinical paper trail.
Right, but it blends that with intimate primary family sources. We have an unpublished manuscript and firsthand memories from the son of one of the lead investigators.
Which really grounds this in reality. Because our mission today is to extract the core insights about how an overseas public health team solved a terrifying ecological puzzle.
And the primitive, highly dangerous conditions they worked under.
Yeah, and the profound physical and emotional toll it took on them. Because we were talking about the sudden emergence of a mysterious, highly lethal bleeding fever in South America.
The register we need to maintain today is one of measured documentary-style reality, because at its core, this is a deeply serious narrative of extreme sacrifice.
Right.
We are examining scientists, doctors, and nurses who willingly walked into a plague zone with almost zero modern protection. They gave their health. They suffered immensely.
And, as we'll see later, one beloved doctor ultimately gave his life.
He did. All to stop an epidemic that was indiscriminately killing children and wiping out entire families.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand how an American team even ended up fighting a plague in the South American jungle, we have to talk about where they launched from. We need to look at MARU.
Right, MARU. That stood for the Middle America Research Unit.
Middle America Research Unit.
Exactly. This was a joint tropical disease laboratory run by the United States Public Health Service and the National Institutes of Health.
And it was based down in Panama, right?
In the Panama Canal Zone, yes. And it operated with significant logistical backing from the Department of Defense.
Now, sitting in the Canal Zone, backed by the military, I mean, that doesn't sound like your standard university research lab.
It wasn't.
It sounds like a forward operating base.
That is exactly what it was. The prevailing concept in mid-century American public health was this idea of the overseas citadel.
The overseas citadel.
Yeah. The United States government maintained these heavily fortified, highly active scientific bases across the globe.
Just stationed out in the world.
Right. And the strategic philosophy was entirely preventive.
Preventive, meaning catching things before they escalate.
Catching them far away. The goal was to hunt down tropical diseases and unknown pathogens in the jungles, far from American shores, before they ever had a chance to spread.
I get the military parallel, fighting the enemy on their soil so you don't have to fight them on yours. But viruses aren't armies.
No, they aren't.
They don't march. So why spend the resources to build a citadel in Panama? Why not just strengthen the health system back in the States and catch the disease at the border?
Because by the time it reaches the border, the battle is already half lost.
Oh, wow.
I mean, we are talking about the dawn of the modern jet age here. Infectious diseases do not respect national boundaries.
Right. A virus doesn't need a passport.
Exactly. If a novel virus emerges in a remote lowland in South America, global travel dictates that it is only a matter of days before it could be walking through an airport in Miami or New York.
Just flying right in.
So the Public Health Service essentially stationed scientific sentinels in these citadels like MARU to act as an early warning and rapid response system.
But the logistics of that seem impossible for the 1960s. I mean, Panama wasn't exactly a short drive from the NIH headquarters in Maryland.
Far from it.
So how do you keep a remote jungle lab staffed with top-tier scientific talent without them burning out or getting completely isolated from the medical community?
Well, the Public Health Service managed it through an astonishing level of administrative agility.
Agility in what way?
Yeah, they maintained this dynamic, highly mobile core of elite officers. They would rotate a relatively small fraternity of brilliant epidemiologists across the entire globe.
Just bouncing around to the hot spots.
Exactly, to wherever the epidemiological fires were burning brightest.
Give me a sense of that scale. How far were these guys rotating?
Consider Dr. Jacob Brody. He was an epidemic intelligence service officer deeply involved in the MARU orbit.
Okay.
But during the actual years of the Bolivian crisis we are going to explore, his rotation had him stationed all the way up in Alaska.
Wait, Alaska. From Panama to Alaska.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was up there battling a severe measles outbreak among Alaska natives. And from there, he eventually went on to fight smallpox in Bangladesh.
That is incredible.
You had these officers seamlessly shifting from the suffocating tropical heat of the Panamanian jungle to the frozen tundra of the Arctic within a single career span.
That is a staggering global footprint. So you have this rapid response network just waiting for a spark. And that spark, the event that absolutely forced the MARU team into action, ignited further south. Take us to Bolivia in 1959.
Specifically, the rural Beni lowlands of Bolivia.
The Beni region.
Right. The Beni is this massive, remote region of tropical savanna and dense jungle. And in 1959, the villagers there began suffering from a horrifying new illness.
And they called it black typhus.
Well, typhus, yes.
The name black typhus alone carries this, medieval plague-like weight.
It sounds biblical.
It really does. What was this disease actually doing to the human body to earn a name like that?
It was initiating a catastrophic systemic failure. The victims would first experience extreme, incapacitating high fevers and severe muscle aches.
So flu-like symptoms initially.
Initially, yes, but then the vascular damage would begin. This was a lethal hemorrhagic fever.
Hemorrhagic meaning bleeding.
Massive bleeding. The virus was essentially attacking the endothelial cells, the lining of the blood vessels, causing them to become highly permeable.
Permeable meaning they start leaking. The actual plumbing of the human body just starts breaking down.
Fundamentally, yes. The victims would bleed uncontrollably from their noses, from their gums, and internally into their gastrointestinal tract.
God, that is awful.
It was a gruesome, agonizing illness that moved relentlessly through entire households. If one person in an adobe hut got sick, the rest of the family would often follow.
And the fatality rate was bad, wasn't it?
It was staggering. Roughly 30%.
30%.
Nearly 1 in 3 people who contracted it bled to death, often within a matter of days.
1 in 3. I mean, if you have a family of 6, you were burying 2 of them by the end of the week. The psychological terror of that, locked inside an isolated jungle village, is hard to even fathom.
It paralyzed the region with fear.
But a virus with that kind of localized explosive lethality doesn't just materialize out of thin air. There has to be a catalyst.
Right, and what's fascinating here is that the underlying catalyst is perhaps the most tragic element of this entire event.
Why is that?
Because this epidemic was not a random act of nature. It was a profound ecological accident, fueled entirely by human intervention.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. How do humans accidentally engineer a localized bleeding fever epidemic?
It began with a major political shift. After the Bolivian National Revolution of 1952, the government initiated a massive push for agricultural development to stabilize the economy.
Okay, so they are trying to farm the land.
Yes. Settlers began aggressively clearing the dense jungle of the Beni to plant sprawling fields of maize.
Corn. They are cutting down the native flora to introduce a massive concentrated food source.
Exactly. A food source that perfectly accommodated a specific native inhabitant.
A rodent, right.
Right. Deep in the natural ecosystem of that jungle lived a wild vesper mouse. It's known scientifically as Calomys caloaceus.
Calomys caloaceus. So by clearing the jungle and planting endless rows of corn, the settlers inadvertently built an all-you-can-eat buffet for this specific wild mouse.
They handed the Calomys caloaceus an unlimited caloric supply. The population was bound to increase.
Wow.
But that agricultural boom is only the first half of the ecological disaster.
There's a second half.
The second half involves a seemingly unrelated public health campaign using the chemical pesticide DDT.
The anti-malarial spray. But wait, DDT's for mosquitoes. How does killing mosquitoes play into a mouse-driven epidemic?
Because DDT bioaccumulates, and it is highly toxic to felines.
Oh, to cats.
Yes. At the exact same time the maize was being planted to feed the region, aggressive anti-malarial DDT spraying campaigns were sweeping through the villages.
Right, trying to stop malaria.
Public health workers were coating the insides of the adobe huts with the chemical to kill the malaria-carrying mosquitoes.
And the village cats living in those huts are exposed to it.
Yeah.
But why cats specifically? I mean, dogs live in the villages too.
It comes down to feline grooming habits and their position in the food chain.
Okay, break that down for me.
The cats would brush against the treated adobe walls, accumulating the DDT dust on their fur. When they groomed themselves, they ingested the neurotoxin directly.
Oh, they're looking it right off their coats.
Exactly. Furthermore, any insect or small prey they ate that had survived the spray also carried a concentrated dose.
So it builds up in their system?
It does. The spraying campaigns effectively wiped out the entire feline population of the villages.
The irony here is just devastating. You have the agricultural sector providing an endless food supply for the mice with the maize.
Right.
And simultaneously, the public health sector is systematically wiping out the natural predators of those mice with the DDT.
Unintentionally, yes.
You are trying to stop malaria, and in doing so, you remove every single biological check and balance. You create a runaway breeding ground for a brand new plague.
It is the absolute definition of an ecological chain reaction. Without the cats to hunt them, the population of K. lemys, Calo H. sus exploded to unnatural numbers.
Because nobody's eating them.
Right. And because their original habitat had been disrupted by the farming, these mice didn't stay out in the maize fields.
They moved indoors.
They invaded the towns. They sought shelter in the thatch-roofed adobe houses of the local villagers.
But here is the piece of the puzzle I don't understand. If the mice are carrying a virus that liquefies human blood vessels, why aren't there thousands of dead mice littering the streets?
Because of coevolution?
Meaning they evolved together.
Exactly. The virus and the mouse had evolved together over countless millennia in the deep jungle. The mice acted as a natural reservoir.
So it doesn't make them sick.
Not at all. Their immune systems tolerated the pathogen. They could carry the virus, reproducing it internally, and shed it continuously in their urine and saliva without ever exhibiting a single symptom of illness.
So they are perfectly healthy biological delivery systems.
That's a good way to put it.
You have these infested thatch roofs teeming with mice, constantly raining down microscopic aerosolized droplets of infected urine onto the dining tables, the beds, and the dirt floors where the families lived.
The domestic space became completely contaminated.
The house itself becomes a weapon. How long did it take for anyone, the locals or the authorities, to figure out that the roofs over their heads were killing them?
It took years of blind terror. From 1959 until roughly 1962, there were over 470 reported cases and more than 140 deaths.
And nobody knew the cause.
Nobody. They didn't know if it was a mosquito, the water, or the air. By May of 1962, the Bolivian government was completely overwhelmed and officially appealed for international medical intervention.
Which is the moment the alarm bell rings at Malayo in Panama. That desperate call for help lands on the desk of the Citadel.
It does.
And it sets the stage for a young investigator to take a risk that, frankly, defies modern comprehension.
We are talking about Dr. Ronald B. MacKenzie.
Tell us about MacKenzie.
He was a newly commissioned epidemiology officer for the U.S. Public Health Service. He had literally just arrived at his post at MARU on August 1st, 1961.
He's the new blood.
Yeah.
A young physician epidemiologist looking to prove himself.
Exactly. Now, the director of MARU at the time was Dr. Henry Beye.
Dr. Bye.
Dr. Beye recognized MacKenzie's sharp clinical mind, but saw his lack of practical field experience.
So he wants to send him out.
Right. Beye attached MacKenzie to what was supposed to be a highly routine, remarkably safe U.S. military nutritional survey team.
And they were heading where?
Heading down to La Paz, the high-altitude capital of Bolivia.
A nutritional survey. Checking caloric intake and vitamin deficiencies. I mean, that is light years away from hunting a 30% fatality bleeding fever.
It was meant to be a training run, just to get his boots dirty, as you might say.
But it didn't stay a training run for long.
No. The reality of what happened in La Paz highlights the incredible autonomy these officers operated under.
Yeah, the family sources really shed light on this part.
We know from the deeply personal family memories, specifically the recollections of MacKenzie's own son, that when MacKenzie arrived at the embassy in La Paz,
A staffer was confused by his presence.
Right, because he was a late addition.
The staffer noticed MacKenzie was a somewhat irregular addition to the nutrition team and asked him what his actual specialty was.
And MacKenzie says, "I'm an epidemiologist. My boss told me to find a disease."
And the staffer replies, "Well, if you really want a disease, there's a nightmare unfolding out in the Beni department. They are calling it black typhus."
That single conversation completely derailed the itinerary.
Completely. MacKenzie didn't consult a committee or wait for months of bureaucratic approvals.
He just went rogue.
He abandoned the safe nutritional survey right then and there. He decided to launch a unilateral solo mission directly into the hot zone.
Which sounds incredibly heroic until you look at the geography of Bolivia and the aviation technology of the early 1960s.
Yes, the logistics were terrifying.
He charters 2 surplus U.S. Army AT-6 aircraft, one for him and one just to haul his medical gear and baggage.
Right.
For those who aren't aviation buffs, an AT-6 is a World War II-era, single-engine, unpressurized advanced trainer.
It's essentially a loud, vibrating metal tube with a propeller.
Exactly. And utterly incapable of traversing the Andes Mountains.
Because La Pia sits at an extreme altitude.
Right, it's surrounded by these jagged Andean peaks that rise well above the maximum service ceiling of an AT-6. The aircraft simply could not generate enough lift to fly over the mountains to reach the Beni lowlands on the other side.
If you can't fly over the wall, you have to find a crack in it.
I want you to visualize the sheer madness of this flight. You are sitting in an unpressurized cockpit. The air is freezing, the engine is deafening.
And the pilot has to physically thread this aircraft through the narrow, winding mountain passes, flying well below the peaks of the Andes.
And they're doing this without modern GPS.
No terrain mapping radar at all.
They are navigating these lethal rock corridors using a stopwatch to time their turns and a magnetic compass. It's like threading a needle while riding a roller coaster blindfolded.
The physical courage required just to arrive at the epidemic site is staggering. One unexpected downdraft, one mistimed turn with the stopwatch, or a sudden cloud bank obscuring the pass, and the aircraft impacts the side of a mountain.
But they make it. The pilots executed the navigation flawlessly. They threaded the Andes, descended into the jungle canopy, and landed MacKenzie in the Beni.
And when MacKenzie steps off that plane onto the dirt strip in San Joaquin, the real work begins.
He starts examining the patients.
Yeah, he does. He looks at the hemorrhaging, the clinical presentation, and immediately makes a crucial deduction.
What does he realize?
He realizes that whatever pathogen is ravaging this town, it is absolutely not typhus.
Because typhus presents differently.
Distinctly differently.
Huh?
This was clearly a novel hemorrhagic fever.
But clinical observation isn't enough to formulate a vaccine or a treatment.
No, to give the virologists back in the Panama Citadel something to actually study, MacKenzie had to secure a physical specimen of the virus itself.
Which means he needs infected human tissue.
Yes.
And the reality of securing that tissue in a jungle village in the 1960s is one of the most visceral, sobering moments of this entire story.
It really is. In a modern epidemiological scenario, securing a brain tissue sample from a victim of a lethal pathogen involves a sterile, negative pressure morgue.
Oscillating surgical bone saws. Full encapsulated hazmat gear.
MacKenzie had none of that. Working alongside a local Bolivian physician, he entered the sweltering adobe hum of a villager who had recently succumbed to the fever.
They had to perform a makeshift autopsy right there in the home.
On the spot.
And because they didn't have surgical bone saws, they had to improvise with what the village had.
They utilized a standard carpenter's handsaw.
A handsaw. Just let that sink in. A doctor standing in the oppressive heat of a jungle hut, physically sawing through the skull of a hemorrhagic fever victim.
Just to extract a piece of infected brain tissue.
Because they knew the virus concentrated heavily in the neurological and organ systems.
Right.
The sheer mechanical grit required to do that, knowing the blood and fluids you are disturbing are teeming with a highly contagious, lethal agent, is beyond comprehension.
It's terrifying. What's fascinating here is that the mechanical difficulty was only compounded by the extreme cultural sensitivity of the moment.
Because they were guests in this community.
Exactly, a deeply traumatized community. And local religious and cultural customs strictly demanded that a body must be buried entirely intact.
Oh, wow. So if the grieving family discovered that the brain had been removed,
it would have provoked unimaginable outrage. It would have completely severed the vital, fragile trust between the American scientists and the local population.
So how do you take the brain without the family knowing the brain is gone?
It required grim resourcefulness.
What'd they do?
After carefully extracting the infected tissue and securing it in a sterile container for the lab, MacKenzie and the local doctor stepped outside the hut.
Okay.
They scoured the immediate area until they found a heavy rock of roughly the identical weight and dimension as the human brain.
A rock.
Yes. They brought the rock inside, placed it gently into the empty cranial cavity, replaced the skull cap, and meticulously sewed the scalp back together.
That is just chilling.
When the family carried their loved one to the burial site, the body felt correct. The center of gravity and the weight were undisturbed.
I've heard people call that physical specimen a Rosetta Stone, but I think that metaphor is too passive.
How so?
Well, a Rosetta Stone just helps you translate something you were already looking at. That brain tissue was more like capturing an enemy courier who was carrying the opposing army's encryption keys.
That's a great way to look at it.
Without those keys, the multi-million-dollar laboratories back in Panama are completely blind and useless. That piece of tissue was the biological starting point that made the entire counterattack possible.
A perfect analogy. But having the encryption keys in your hand in the jungle doesn't do any good if you can't get them back to the code breakers in the Citadel.
Right. You have to transport it.
And the logistics of moving the team, the specimens, and the equipment back and forth between Panama and the Bolivian interior continued to be fraught with near-fatal disasters.
Like the incident with Dr. Patricia Webb.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Case in point, Dr. Patricia Webb.
Tell us about her.
She was a brilliant, highly experienced laboratory virologist and a career public health service officer. During the escalation of the MARU response, she was aboard a U.S. Air Force C-47 transport plane.
Ferrying vital personnel and gear down to San Joaquin.
Right.
Now, the C-47 is a legendary workhorse aircraft, but it still relies on fuel. And they are flying over the Amazonian basin, which is just an endless, trackless ocean of green canopy.
There are no alternate airports. There are no highways to land on.
So what happens?
A severe miscalculation occurred regarding the fuel consumption versus the distance. Deep over the remote jungle, the flight crew realized they were critically low on aviation fuel.
Oh, no.
The situation degraded so rapidly that the pilot ordered the scientific team to prepare to abandon the aircraft.
Imagine this scenario. You are Dr. Webb. You are an NIH virologist whose domain is microscopes, pipettes, and sterile lab coats.
A lab scientist, complete.
Yeah. And suddenly, someone is strapping a heavy military parachute to your back. You are standing by the open jump door of an airplane, staring down at the unforgiving Amazon canopy, preparing to jump into the absolute unknown because the engines are starting to sputter out.
It highlights the omnipresent physical danger that surrounded every single aspect of this mission long before they even looked through a microscope.
You're moments away from bailing out.
Literally moments. At the absolute last possible second, as the engines were starving for fuel, the pilot visually acquired the crude dirt airstrip at San Joaquin.
Talk about a close call.
He managed to glide the aircraft into a terrifying dead stick landing. They survived by a margin of mere minutes, perhaps seconds.
Okay, so the team miraculously survives the flights. They secure the lethal brain tissue with a handsaw, and they get it back to the Citadel in Panama. Now the real scientific heavy lifting begins.
The virology.
Right. We have to talk about Karl Johnson and the glass box, because when I read this part of the record, I genuinely had to stop and reread it to ensure I wasn't misunderstanding the mechanics.
It is hard to believe, even for public health professionals today. Dr. Karl Johnson was the virologist recruited to MARU specifically for this kind of work.
And he's the one who eventually named it?
Yes. He would ultimately be the one to isolate the virus in 1963, working primarily from a patient's infected spleen sample. He officially bestowed the name Machupo on the virus.
After the river, right?
Right, honoring the local Machupo River that snakes through the Beni region.
But let's look at how he isolated it. Again, we picture modern BSL-4 labs with independent oxygen supplies and airtight suits. What did Karl Johnson use to protect himself from a virus that causes human beings to bleed out from their internal organs?
He used a box he built himself.
A box?
The sophisticated biosafety technology we consider standard today simply did not exist, or at least wasn't available in that tropical outpost.
So what did he do?
To protect his own respiratory system from airborne viral particles while he was homogenizing and processing this intensely lethal spleen tissue, Johnson constructed a homemade containment system. It was essentially a coffin-sized box made entirely of glass.
But how does a glass box actually let you manipulate the tissue without exposing yourself? You had to get your hands in there.
He had to physically alter the glass. He cut 2 large circular holes into the front pane of the glass box.
Okay.
He then took heavy, shoulder-length rubber laboratory gloves, slid them through the holes, and sealed the edges around the glass.
Seal them with what? Laboratory-grade titanium clamps?
More likely, standard hardware store caulking and adhesive tape.
You have got to be kidding me. Caulking and tape.
He created a crude, terrifying ancestor of the modern biosafety cabinet.
Hold on. If you just have a sealed glass box, how do you prevent the air inside, which is now swirling with aerosolized hemorrhagic fever virus, from blowing back out into the room if there's a microscopic leak in the caulk?
That is the crucial question.
Because modern cabinets use complex negative pressure systems to ensure air always flows inward. Did he have negative pressure?
He did not have automated, computerized negative pressure systems. He had to rely on exhaust fans that vented the air, hopefully filtered out of the room, creating a rudimentary directional airflow.
Rudimentary?
But the margin of error was effectively zero.
It's like trying to defuse a bomb while wearing stiff oven mitts inside a fish tank.
It really is.
He has to slide his arms into these rigid rubber gloves. He has to hold scalpels, manage centrifuges, and pipette fluids teeming with Machupo.
One slip of the hand.
Exactly. If his scalpel slips and pierces the rubber glove, if the caulk around the glass degrades in the Panamanian humidity, he is instantly exposed to a pathogen that dissolves the human vascular system.
The physical dexterity and the psychological endurance required to stare through that pane of glass for weeks on end, knowing a single pinprick means death, is a testament to Johnson's absolute dedication to the science.
And it worked.
It yielded results.
Right.
Working under those harrowing conditions, Johnson successfully isolated the Machupo virus.
Incredible.
And working alongside him, Dr. Patricia Webb, the same virologist who nearly had to parachute into the jungle, analyzed the agent's properties and helped classify it as an arenavirus.
Let's pause on that classification. We throw words like arenavirus around, but what does that actually mean for the mechanics of the disease? Why did classifying it matter?
The classification is everything. It tells you who the enemy's relatives are and how they behave.
Like a biological family tree.
Exactly. The term arenavirus comes from the Latin word arena, meaning sand.
Sand.
Yes. When Patricia Webb and the virology community looked at these types of viruses under an electron microscope, they noticed the viral particles contained tiny, grainy structures that made them look like they were filled with sand.
What was the sand?
Those grainy structures are actually ribosomes snatched from the host cell.
Oh, wow.
The arenavirus family is notorious for causing chronic infections in rodents like Orchaeolomys, Callo H. sus, and severe acute hemorrhagic fevers when they accidentally cross over into humans.
So by classifying it, Webb and Johnson could suddenly cross-reference Machupo against other known pathogens.
They were building the architectural blueprint of the enemy.
And the work they did in that primitive lab was foundational for the entire future of virology, wasn't it?
Immeasurably so. The rudimentary containment protocols they invented, the classification techniques they refined, the sheer operational tenacity they developed, these were the exact paradigms that Dr. Webb and Dr. Johnson would carry forward into the 1970s.
Wait, really? What happened in the 70s?
When an even more infamous hemorrhagic fever erupted in Africa, they were the ones called upon to confront and name it: Ebola.
Ebola. That is just mind-blowing.
They were literally writing the textbook on how to hunt lethal viruses while under active fire.
But while Johnson is spending weeks staring through a glass box trying to map the virus's architecture, there is a ticking clock outside that room.
In Bolivia.
Right. The villagers in San Joaquin are still bleeding out. Science takes time. Who is keeping the patients alive while the lab does its work?
This is a crucial, often overlooked element of the massive public health response. You need the epidemiologists to map the spread. You need the virologists to isolate the bug.
But on the absolute front lines, you need clinicians to look the dying in the eye and treat them.
And in the Beni, that bedside medical care fell to a very unique, highly improvised coalition.
Introduce us to the clinical team. Let's start with Dr. James Warren Ryan.
Captain Dr. James Warren Ryan was a U.S. Army Special Forces Group surgeon.
A Green Beret doctor.
Yes. He was a Harvard Medical School graduate who had actively volunteered for airborne training, making him a fully qualified paratrooper based out of the Canal Zone.
So he's not just a doctor, he's a soldier.
He was the kind of physician specifically trained to jump into the most austere, dangerous environments on the planet.
And he did exactly that.
When the Bolivian crisis escalated beyond local control, Dr. Ryan parachuted directly into the roadless Beni territory to establish tactical, frontline medical clinics.
A Harvard surgeon jumping out of airplanes into a plague zone. That is wild. And working alongside Dr. Ryan and his Special Forces medics, there was a completely different kind of volunteer. Someone entirely civilian.
Yes, Rose Navarro.
Tell us about Rose.
She was a United States Peace Corps volunteer and a registered nurse.
A Peace Corps nurse and a Special Forces surgeon holding the line together.
This is a very unique partnership.
But what does holding the line actually mean in a jungle clinic in 1963 against a bleeding fever? Because they didn't have a cure.
That is the most horrifying reality of their mission. There was absolutely no targeted therapeutic intervention available, no magic pill, no specialized antiviral Beye drip they could hang to kill the Machupo virus.
So what do?
The only medical strategy they could employ was supportive care.
Break down supportive care in this context. It sounds benign, but I imagine it is incredibly intense.
It is exhausting, relentless physical labor. The virus is systematically destroying the patient's blood vessels, causing massive internal and external fluid loss.
Which leads to shock.
Right. A catastrophic drop in blood pressure and eventual shock. Supportive care means you are desperately trying to manually replace the fluids the patient is leaking.
You are fighting a losing battle against gravity and biology.
You are constantly monitoring vital signs, pushing intravenous saline, trying to manage raging fevers with basic antipyretics, and attempting to provide basic nutrition to bodies that are shutting down.
Think about the physical environment of that care. You are in a sweltering, primitive jungle clinic. There is no air conditioning.
None.
The smell of blood and sickness is pervasive. Your job requires you to get intimately close to the sickest patients. You are changing heavily soiled bed linens. You are wiping blood from mouths and noses.
It is incredibly intimate, dangerous work.
You are trying to find a viable vein to start an IV line on a patient who is actively thrashing in a fever delirium.
And you are doing all of this fully aware that one tiny mistake, one accidental needle stick, one microscopic splash of infected fluid into your eye could mean you are the next person lying in that bed.
It requires a profound, quiet brand of clinical bravery.
There was a brutal division of labor at play here. The MARU scientists like Johnson and MacKenzie needed time
to figure out the science.
They needed weeks to understand the epidemiology, to isolate the virus, to pinpoint the ecological trigger. But until they solved the puzzle, someone had to sit with the highly infectious, terrified villagers.
Dr. Ryan, Rose Navarro, and the Special Forces medics absorbed the immediate, visceral trauma of the epidemic. They put their own bodies between the virus and the villagers to buy the scientists the time they needed.
And that constant, terrifying proximity to the virus, both in the sweltering clinical wards and in the crude laboratories, was a massive gamble.
You can't roll the dice like that forever.
No, you cannot operate in a high-risk environment with primitive tools indefinitely without the odds catching up to you. Eventually, it exacted a devastating physical and emotional toll on the entire MARU team.
Let's talk about that toll. Because the virus didn't care if you were an American scientist or a Bolivian farmer. Let's look at the wave of infections that tore through the investigators.
The casualties mounted rapidly. Dr. Karl Johnson, the man who spent weeks staring into the glass box and finally isolated the Machupo virus, contracted Bolivian hemorrhagic fever himself.
He got it.
He did, and very nearly died from it. Dr. Patricia Webb eventually contracted the virus while working tirelessly in the laboratory back in Panama, though she thankfully survived the ordeal.
And the infection struck the field team just as hard, didn't they?
Yes. Dr. Ronald MacKenzie, the man who threaded the Andes in the AT-6 and performed the handsaw autopsy, contracted the fever while working deep in the hot zone in San Joaquin.
Oh, man.
One of the Special Forces medics working alongside Dr. Ryan, a Sergeant Lowry, also contracted it.
So they are dropping one by one. What happens to MacKenzie and Lowry?
When MacKenzie and Lowry fell ill, their conditions deteriorated rapidly. They were in critical danger of hemorrhaging.
They need higher-level care immediately.
Right. The military had to dispatch a massive U.S. Air Force C-130 Hercules transport plane to evacuate them out of the Bolivian jungle and fly them back to the Canal Zone for emergency, high-level supportive care.
And this brings us to one of the most profoundly moving details of this entire deep dive. Because we don't just have the clinical notes of that medevac flight. We have the deeply personal perspective of what that arrival actually looked like to the people waiting for them.
Yes, the family perspectives.
We have the first-hand recollection of Dr. MacKenzie's son, who's just a young boy at the time.
He remembers being taken by his mother to Howard Field, the massive military airbase in the Canal Zone, to meet his father's medical evacuation flight.
I want to paint this picture because it brings the sterile concept of public health right down to the human heart. You are a little boy standing on the shimmering hot tarmac of a military runway.
Right.
You hear the deafening roar of a 4-engine C-130 cargo plane touching down. It taxis towards you, the smell of aviation fuel heavy in the air. The massive rear cargo ramp lowers.
And you know your father is inside.
And you know he is terribly dangerously sick. Your instinct as a child is to run toward him, to comfort him. And as they bring his father out, this brilliant, fearless epidemiologist who has been broken by this jungle fever, his father weakly raises a hand toward his own son and simply says, "Stay away."
Stay away. It is a heartbreaking command.
It really is.
It perfectly encapsulates the dual tragedy of the disease detective. He is desperate for the comfort of his family, but his overriding instinct, his absolute professional duty, is to protect them from the very pathogen that is currently ravaging his own body.
Because he doesn't know if he's contagious.
At that precise moment in the timeline, the exact transmission mechanism of Machupo from human to human was still not fully understood.
Right, they didn't have all the answers yet.
He didn't know if he could infect his wife and child just by breathing on them, or if a bead of sweat could be lethal, so he stops his own son from embracing him.
That is the unseen collateral damage of these overseas citadels. The families absorb the terror just as much as the scientists.
They absolutely do.
And tragically, the cost wasn't just illness and fear, it was also death. We have to honor the ultimate sacrifice made by the team's director, Dr. Henry Beye.
Dr. Beye was the senior NIH MARU figure who originally authorized MacKenzie's deployment and helped mobilize the entire massive U.S. response.
So he was the guy calling the shots.
Yes. But as the epidemic dragged on and the logistical complexities compounded, Dr. Beye refused to manage the crisis from afar.
He didn't want to just sit behind a desk.
He traveled down into the Bolivian interior to direct the field operations personally.
He goes to the front lines. But he wasn't felled by the Machupo virus itself, was he?
No, he wasn't. According to the historical record and the intimate family sources, while Dr. Beye was out there living and working in the primitive, exhausting conditions of the Beni, his immune system became severely compromised.
Just worn down by the elements.
Worn completely down. He contracted a devastating field-acquired fungal infection, specifically believed to be blastomycosis.
Stop there. Blastomycosis. How does a senior director catch a lethal fungal infection just by being in the field?
Blastomycosis is caused by inhaling the microscopic spores of the blastomyces fungus.
Where does that live?
It naturally lives in moist soil and decomposing organic matter. Exactly the kind of environment you find in a sweltering, disturbed jungle biome.
Oh, wow. So just breathing the air around the soil.
Normally, a healthy immune system might fight off the inhaled spores, but Dr. Beye was exhausted, stressed, and working relentless hours.
His defenses were down.
The fungus took root in his lungs, eventually disseminating through his bloodstream and placing insurmountable strain on his body.
His immune defenses were completely depleted by the sheer physical toll of the mission.
Exactly. The infection severely compromised his health and ultimately triggered a fatal cardiac event.
A heart attack.
Yes. The published record confirms that Dr. Henry Beye died on April 9, 1964 in Panama at the age of 52, while still actively engaged in directing the MARU operation.
He literally worked himself to death in the service of stopping this epidemic.
He gave everything.
As the director, he easily could have stayed in a comfortable air-conditioned office in Panama or back in Maryland, reading daily reports and moving pins on a map.
But the ethos of the public health service in that era demanded that leaders share the risk. He stayed in the field, fully knowing his own body was failing him.
The psychological and physical burden on these scientists, on the clinical medics, and on the families waiting back home was immense.
Unquantifiable.
This wasn't merely a prestigious government career path. They were literally sacrificing their health, their family stability, and their very lives to save communities they had no personal connection to.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really highlights the humanity behind the science.
So what does this all mean? Step back and look at the board in early 1964. Half the team is falling critically ill.
Karl Johnson is barely surviving the fever.
MacKenzie and Lowry have been medevaced out.
Patricia Webb is infected.
And the director, Dr. Beye, is dead. In almost any modern bureaucratic context, this is the exact moment a risk management committee pulls the plug.
Oh, absolutely. They declare the risk matrix unacceptable, they recall the personnel, and they abandon the citadel.
That would be the expected protocol today. The liability alone would halt operations.
But that is not what happened.
No, it isn't. The surviving members of the MARU team, driven by an almost unfathomable, relentless resolve to honor their fallen director and finish the job, refused to abandon the mission.
They kept going.
They partnered with a brilliant ecologist named Merle Kuns, and they returned to the ecology of the Beni to strike a final decisive blow.
Which brings us to the climax of the investigation. We are back in San Joaquin.
The team has survived the fevers. Johnson has successfully isolated the virus from the spleen tissue, and MacKenzie's field mapping has painted a clear picture.
They understand the enemy now.
They have formulated a solid, undeniable hypothesis linking that specific wild mouse, the Calomys caloesus, to the human infections.
Thanks to the exhaustive epidemiological mapping and the deep ecological research driven by Merle Kuns, the team realized a fundamental truth.
What was it?
The solution to this hemorrhagic fever epidemic wasn't going to be a pharmaceutical drug.
Because they didn't have a vaccine.
Right. The solution had to be entirely ecological. They had to physically break the chain of transmission between the shedding mice and the vulnerable humans.
They need to prove that if you remove the mice, you remove the disease.
Exactly.
And they designed an experiment in May of 1964 to prove it definitively. Merle Kuns and the MARU physicians launch a massive, highly controlled rodent trapping campaign in San Joaquin. How did they structure it to ensure it was scientifically rigorous?
They approached it with strict scientific discipline, essentially turning the living town of San Joaquin into a giant controlled laboratory.
How so?
They divided the town perfectly in half geographically.
Cut it right down the middle.
In one half of the town, they initiated aggressive house-by-house trapping and used poison baits to systematically and completely eradicate the rodent population from the adobe huts and thatch roofs.
Okay, and the other half?
In the other half of the town, they left the mice entirely untouched as a control group.
That is a stark, brutal experiment. You are basically leaving half the town to their fate just to prove the science. And the results?
The results were immediate, undeniable, and staggering. In the treated half of the town where the mice had been eradicated, the new cases of Bolivian hemorrhagic fever dropped instantly.
And in the untreated half?
In the untreated half, the villagers continued to hemorrhage and die at the same horrifying rate.
So they proved the theory beyond a shadow of a doubt. The mice are the vectors.
Once they possessed that absolute proof, they terminated the experiment and unleashed the trapping campaign on the entire town.
They went after all of them.
They went house to house, meticulously clearing every single Calomys caloesus from the ceilings, the walls, and the food storage areas.
And what happened to the epidemic curve?
Within approximately 2 weeks of clearing the mice from the entire town, the number of new Machupo infections plummeted to near zero.
2 weeks.
The terrifying epidemic that had paralyzed the region for 5 long years, that had killed nearly a third of everyone it touched, was effectively broken.
It is an incredible, hard-won victory. But they weren't entirely finished, were they?
No, because ecology abhors a vacuum.
Right. They knew that if they just packed up their traps and flew back to Panama, the jungle would eventually encroach again. The mice would breed in the maize fields, migrate back into the huts, and the nightmare cycle would restart.
They couldn't trap mice forever.
They had to fix the original underlying ecological imbalance.
They had to replace the apex predator that the anti-malarial DDT spraying had inadvertently wiped out years prior.
The cats.
Yes, which leads to one of the most surreal, visually amazing logistical operations in the history of public health.
To ensure the rodents did not return to the town, the MARU team coordinated with the United States military to orchestrate an airlift. But they weren't airlifting medicine or troops?
They airlifted cats.
It sounds almost absurd, but it was a brilliantly simple, perfectly tailored ecological solution. To permanently protect San Joaquin, the team used military transport aircraft to fly hundreds of cats into the Bolivian jungle.
Hundreds of them.
I just picture a C-130 landing on a dirt strip, the ramp lowering, and a literal army of cats streaming out into the jungle. It is amazing. They restocked the local feline population.
And nature took its course. The cats naturally fanned out through the town, took up residence in the homes, and eagerly reestablished the natural predatory check on the Vesper mice.
The cats kept the mice out of the houses, and by extension, the virus stayed in the deep jungle where it naturally belonged.
This operation represents the absolute peak of American field epidemiology abroad. The MARU team didn't just identify a biological agent under a microscope.
They looked at the whole picture.
They synthesized human agricultural behavior, chemical pesticide misuse, complex animal population dynamics, and cutting-edge virology to engineer a perfectly tailored non-medical intervention.
They fundamentally cured a lethal epidemic without dispensing a single drop of medicine.
It's a masterpiece of public health.
And that incredible victory left a lasting, profound legacy in Bolivia, a legacy that intimately honors the terrible physical cost paid by the American team. Let's talk about how the town of San Joaquin remembers this event, and specifically, how they remember Dr. Henry Beye.
Usually, when a community wishes to honor a hero who saved them, they cast a static bronze statue and place it in a town square.
Right, a plaque or a statue.
But the people of San Joaquin chose a far more meaningful path to honor the fallen MARU director.
Instead of a cold stone monument, they named their primary active health facility after him. It is officially designated as the Centro de Salud Henry K. Beye.
If you consider the philosophy of public health, a living, breathing clinic is the perfect memorial for a dedicated officer.
Because it's functional.
It is a monument that continues the exact life-saving work he died trying to facilitate. Every single day, doctors and nurses inside that clinic treat the sick, administer vaccines to children, and actively protect the community.
It stands as a testament to the core belief that scientific knowledge is most valuable not when it is published in a journal, but when it is deeply understood and practically applied to alleviate human suffering.
Henry Beye gave his life to bring health to that isolated town, and his name still presides over the healing that happens there today.
It is a beautiful tribute. It honors the rigorous science, the unimaginable personal sacrifice, and the enduring human connection forged between those American scientists and the Bolivian people they swore to help.
It remains the defining legacy of MARU and a high watermark for the golden age of the United States Public Health Service's overseas operations.
And that brings us to the end of our story today. But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought to ponder on your own. We've spent this time talking about MARU as this incredible citadel in the jungle, a forward operating base that allowed brilliant, courageous minds to hunt down threats before they ever had a chance to reach our shores.
A true scientific outpost.
But the era of these massive, permanent overseas public health citadels has largely faded into history. Decades of shifting priorities and contracted funding mean many of those outposts have been dismantled, handed over, or simply abandoned.
The landscape has changed completely.
So ask yourself, what exactly did we lose when we decided to close those doors? If another invisible killer, a novel, lethal pathogen with a 30% fatality rate emerges in a remote roadless corner of the world tomorrow, well, do we still possess the global agility to catch it?
That's the real question.
Do we still have the forward operating outpost ready to deploy? And more importantly, do we still have the people, the scientists and clinicians willing to risk everything, willing to stick their bare hands into homemade glass boxes and thread rickety aircraft through treacherous mountain passes to stop it before it reaches us?
It is definitely something to think about.
It's something to think about the next time you picture a pristine, perfectly safe modern laboratory and assume that safety has always been a given. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. It's been an incredible journey, and we appreciate you taking the time to unpack it with us.